Germany and the Conservatoire Royal de la Musique Bruxelles in Belgium. She pursued postgrad studies in the University of Music and Performing Arts Vienna. Before starting her composition studies, she also studied language arts at the University for Applied Arts in Vienna, and as a writer, she is currently published by Residenzverlag here in Salzburg. 2023, she completed her studies in instrumental composition at the University in Vienna under guidance of Karl-Heinz Essel, achieving honors. Currently, she is continuing her studies in media composition under guidance of Jorge Sanchez-Gion. She has gained inspiration for participation in various international workshops, master classes, lectures, and now here in Salzburg. Afamia has collaborated with numerous ensembles and she has won prizes in international composition competitions. The compositions have been premiered at several festivals. Welcome, Afamia.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this event. At the beginning, I will just play a little bit of music. What you just listened to was the beginning of the string quartet Opus 12 by Hába. I must say I feel really honored to be allowed to hold a presentation here. When I wrote my thesis, I read about the Ecumenical Society, and now I'm here, which is quite unbelievable to me. But I'm not a specialist in microtonal music. My interest in microtonal music first arose from listening to Arabic music. But I didn't listen also to this music very carefully. On the contrary, this music always seemed somehow out of tune to me. Maybe because I started to play the piano at a very early age. So usually when you play the piano, you don't have to think a lot about intonation. But I also played violin and sang the choir. And playing the violin, intonation became a very huge topic, and I realized that defining a note isn't such a clear thing as I had thought before. I also noticed that actually between an F, for example, and an F sharp, there is a really large but undefined sound space, and this sound space wasn't only undefined, it was also labeled wrong. So when I started studying composition and dealing with more modern playing techniques, in which sometimes microtones were included, such as multiphonics or glissandi, I got the impression that it's actually a pity to limit yourself to just the 12 tones and not to use the whole possible sound space in a very natural way, as you would use the 12 tones. But the problem I saw for myself at the time was that I couldn't find a systematic approach to working with more than 12 notes. And regarding that, perhaps it was fortunate that when I was writing my thesis, my supervisor suggested the composer Alois Hába. I'm sure you all know the Czech composer Alois Hába, born in 1893. He began his musical career in his childhood as a violinist, playing folk music in his father's folk band. His mother was an excellent folk singer who taught Hába peasant songs from the region. The intervals in the singing sometimes deviated from the semitone system. So these folk songs were probably the first stimuli for the building of this microtonal system in both musical theory and practice. Therefore, I'd like to note that Hába's original interest in microtones did not come from an abstract idea, but from his actual listening experience. To confirm this, here you can see a transcription by Hába of a simple folk tune melody, taken from his autobiography My Way to Quarter in sixth tone music. Line 1 shows the melody is actually sung, with higher D and F sharps. Line 2 shows the melody as actually written in the half-tone system, and line 3A shows a typical accompaniment that had only traditional major and minor triads. Line 3B shows a harmonization by Hába, as he claims after Novak, one of his composition teachers, or after Bartók in the so to say newer way. That means with the use of triads that aren't inherent to the scale. The melody is now rather seen as a Dorian mode. And line 3C shows again a further developed harmonization done by Hába now with the use of microtonal altered tones. Hába says that the alterations have to be understood as quarter or sixth tones equivalent to those sung in the melody. Important later influences were certainly encounters with Ferruccio Busoni, as well as reading Busoni's sketch of a new aesthetic of music independently of Hába, but more or less at the same time also Russian composer Ivan Vishnegradsky began composing quarter tones. Both Hába and Vishnegradsky, both born in 1893, were amongst the first composers who applied microtonal means systematically and also would continue to do so not only for a certain time period, but during the rest of their lives. Certainly also supported by the fact that Hába had previously dealt extensively with the quarter tone system in his thoughts and in his inner sound imagination, he succeeded in completing his string quartet Opus 7, which was his first string quartet in the quarter tone system, within 14 days. About the string quartet, he writes that in melody, quarter tones are often used functionally as passing notes and as leading notes, similar to the semitones in the semitone system. As you can see in the beginning already in the beginning of the string quartet Opus 7 circled in red, in the very first motive, the functional use of quarter tones is confirmed. Starting the string quartet on D natural, the high D leads as passing note to E flat. The other instruments begin with similar motives, circled in blue in a way of imitation. But despite the quarter tone alterations in this string quartet, in fact, the usual intervals often result. For example, here framed in orange, the low C in measure 1 on the third beat in the second violin, together with the low F in the first violin that follows immediately, results in a natural fourth. The proximity to tonal music becomes even clearer, where voices are played in parallel with quarter tone alterations and extensions, but the ultimate sound result predominantly are normal major or minor, thirds or sixths, such as in the third measure regarding the second violin and the cello, here framed in green. Also here we have quarter tones as passing notes. So the quarter tone system did not appear to Hába as a completely new musical language, but as a further development of the old one. So to Hába, the string quartet was mainly about the saturation of the semitone system with finer tonal differences. A very similar approach to dealing with quarter tones can already be found with Milli Mellendorf in his music theoretical work Music with Quarter Tones, Experiences on the Bichromatic Harmonium, which was published in 1917. Mellendorf repeatedly mentions that the old 12-tone system could remain completely untouched despite the addition of new quarter tone steps. The new pitches were primarily there to increase musical expression. Mellendorf also claims that the new tones are particularly well suited as passing notes and leading tones, and gives several examples of how the quarter tones could be used in, for example, modulations to make tonal modulations even smoother. Incidentally, Hába also takes over the designation of the quarter tones for Mellendorf. For both Mellendorf and Hába, the term high C means a quarter tone higher C and low D means a quarter tone lower D. In the string quartet Opus 12, written a few years later, Hába has focused more on the harmony of the intervals itself. Stable intervals, altered by quarter tones, appear constantly throughout the piece. According to Hába, these quarter tone altered intervals characterized a bolder way of imagination and expression. Again, he connects it with his very first listening experiences in folk music, saying, when singing, folk singers often used intervals that were about a quarter tone, larger or smaller than the intervals of the semitone system. In summary, the use of quarter tones in these string quartets had quite different meanings. In the string quartet Opus 7, quarter tones often appear as passing or leading notes in the linear progression of the melody. allowing finer tonal differentiation. In the string quartet opus 12, they appear more often as stable, altered intervals, allowing bolder imagination and expression. I will now make a cut here and come back to Hába later. What you just heard was the beginning of Cerha's first string quartet Makam. As I already mentioned, my interest in microtones was first aroused by listening to Arabic music. But I have to say that I could never really enjoy listening to Arabic music. It sounded a bit strange to me. And I started to wonder, why is that? I'm not an expert on Arabic music, but in all the music theories that I've read so far, I could find that one tends to speak of a more or less equal division of the tone into quarter tones. So we can assume, with all legitimate reservations, such as that hearing must always be given priority over a mathematically equal subdivision, that in Arabic music the tone is regularly divided into more or less equal 4 quarters, just as in Western music the tone is divided into 2 halves. At least that is one of the descriptions currently in use. I won't dive into Arabic music theory too deep, but perhaps we should briefly clarify what a makam is, as I'm going to talk about the first string quartet by Friedrich Cerha, which is also called makam. A makam is a kind of scale built of 2 or more smaller units, which consists of 3, 4, or 5 tones. In theory books, these small units are called ajnas or insignifications. These units have fixed interval structures and, when put together, after certain rules, build a so-called makam, a scale, so to say. Takassim means finally a way to play freely within a makam or to modulate between different modulation pathways. As I see, here is a board. I just want to write some of the ajnas for you to get an idea. So I said there are 5 notes or 4 notes. For example, there is this one, consisting of 5 notes, which looks exactly like our minor scale beginning, which is called Nahawand. There is another 5-tone scale. Which looks quite similar, but has here a quarter tone lowered E. So we have a 3/4 quarter tone step between D and E flat, E half, and the next one. These are 5 notes, units. There are similar units, like for example, one very famous one starts on D, but looks otherwise exactly like this one. So this would be called Rast, and this one would be called Bayati. And then there is another unit, even smaller, for example, which starts on that. It's called Sika, the only one that starts on a quarter tone. And there is one other I might show, like this. Yeah, Hijaz. So basically, a makam is a way to put those small units together in a certain way, and there are certain rules. and you can put them together however you want, of course. That's just an idea for that.
The genes.
Exactly.
Together to Makans.
And I must admit that reading theory books about Arabic maqam theory has sometimes really frustrated me, but then luckily I found a course in which actually Maya Youssef, who is a professional qanun player from Syria, explained it in a very clear and understandable way. And also by including listening through ear training, which was very important to me. And then I thought maybe the strangeness didn't even come from those quarter tones, but was due to other elements, such as the presence of extreme ornamentation or this plaintive monophony. But however, when I discovered that Friedrich Cerha, who was also, by the way, a teacher of my former composition, Professor Karl-Heinz Essel, named his first string quartet Maqam, my curiosity was naturally great. The string quartet was composed in 1989, and perhaps in Cerha's extensive oeuvre, his engagement with Arabic music or with microtonal music is not necessarily that one immediately thinks of. But Cerha wrote that since his studies he had never completely stopped dealing with Arabic culture. What, according to Cerha, was especially new to him in this string quartet was the structural use of quarter tones. He pointed out that what emerges is definitely music from our culture, a music, of course, which got its profile from the fact that the creative imagination was inspired by musical states and constellations that do not exist in our altitudes. When more or less a year ago I finally emailed Cerha about the string quartet to ask if the string quartet was based on a specific maqam, he replied that the string quartet was not referring to a specific maqam. Since then I had the chance to have a look at the drafts of the string quartet. The drafts, by the way, are in the archive in Krems, so I hope it's okay that I show some. So actually, because he said, or maybe I will first read a part of the mail translation. Dear Afamia Al-Dayaa, I've dealt a lot with Arabic music and of course with writings on maqamat. In my attempts to reconcile the result of hearing with the theoretical specification, the former has increasingly gained in importance. In the end, I did not refer to a particular form of maqam in the compositional work, but derived a technique from listening experiences which proceeds from characteristics that I consider to be essential and developed them independently. So, I just pointed out the viola voice, the third, because here we see like there are many quarter tone alterations following each other, which would be rather untypical for a maqam. Like maqam has one or two altered notes and not a line of many after each other. And I think what was more important, Cerha mentioned several times, was the rhythmical approach to this composition. Like we have here certain rhythmical patterns, which then are varied, exchanged, and so on. Like I think that other aspects also of the music were more important to him in this quartet. In a second, still, like in this, you can see that there are those 4 or 5 note units, but they are not exactly like they are in the original maqam. Like uses them as a kind of, what can I say, model, but is not referring to those that are existent. Okay. So I asked Maya Youssef if she thought it was possible to connect different musical cultures in a meaningful and respectful way, and she replied that of course it was possible, but that it had to be done on the basis of a deep understanding. Rather reluctantly, for example, she mentioned what she called Hollywood Hijaz, that's why I painted it here, with this augmented second, seems to be inflationary, used to be cliched Oriental sentimentality. And that's for sure not what Cerha wanted, and for sure not what we want. And so. If you're going to listen to the whole string quartet, you will realize that the work consists of different sections, each with a very unique characteristic. In a way, they are like miniatures. Some sections are quiet and meditative, others loud, busy and intense. But what overall really works well in the string quartet, in my opinion, is that the finer tone differentiations are actually clearly brought out. Quarter tones are not understood only as supporting us for us to tonal material. They are giving enough space and time to unfold and therefore to become comprehensible. The quarter tones are clearly more than just extensions of the tonal material of the semitone system. Thus, with the good use of quarter tones, it seems to be possible to compose more subtle. That's a handwriting of Cerha, where he writes for characteristics for the sections, like one, langsam, and so on. But actually, I cannot really read everything. Let's have a look briefly at the beginning of the string quartet. First of all, we see that the tones are really given enough time to unfold. There is no rush. A kind of fundamental tone or central tone is established, as well as a solo voice, obviously, in the viola. The quarter tones appear at first only in the viola, while the other instruments continue to play the central tone. This creates a very dense but also subtle and floating tension. Gradually, the quarter tones also appear in the other instruments. And one could say that in the course of this first section there is a kind of minimal modulation or shift going on, which leads away from the central tone E. And finally, D will be the opening tone of the next second section. The character of the second section contrasts with the character of the first section. So, I tried to find similarities between Cerha and Hába, and both actually were violinists, or violin was their first instrument to start with. Also, Cerha studied and knew the music of Alois Hába, Cerha, and also his student Georg Friedrich Haas. Also, both Cerha and Hába's approach to microtonality was not based on abstract mathematical ideas, but on real listening experiences, and both relied to folk music. Hába to the folk music of his own region, and Cerha to folk music from further away, such as Arabic music. So now I'm coming already to the last part of my presentation, in which I'm going to talk about Hábas neue Harmonielehre des diatonischen, chromatischen Viertel-, Drittel-, Sechstel- und Zwölftel-Tonsystems, but especially, or better said, only about the part in which he speaks about a system of writing in quarter tones. Alois Hába could be seen, in my opinion, as a pioneer for microtonal music for the reason that he developed a very detailed method of composing microtonal music based on the equal division of the octave at a very early stage. Also, Hába was not one of those composers who kept secret about their thoughts and compositional processes. On the contrary, he wrote extensively about his thoughts, about biographical events, and about aspects of music theory, because he was not only passionate about using microtones in his own compositions, but also about developing a real systematic theory for the purpose of teaching. In his Neue Harmonielehre, published in 1927, or Mein Weg zur Viertel- und Sechsteltonmusik, published in 1971. The problem with these books is that, written by Hába himself, they are not exactly objective, but they are still valuable because, according, for example, to Suzette Mary Batten, who did not shy away from taking the effort of translating Hába's Neue Harmonielehre into English, Hába remains the only one who has dealt in depth with equal tempered quarter tone and sixth tone system. Whereas other composers and theorists have well-written detailed studies on microtonal systems without an equal tempered basis, as there would be to name Adrian Fokker or Harry Partch. But let me ask first, what was the state of Central European music at the time? What were composers and music theorists usually confronted with? In my opinion, I would point out some aspects which seem essential to me for the increasing interest, especially in microtonal music at that time. It might be the increasing amount of chromaticism, and of course the general emancipation of the dissonance, and also the implementation of 12-tone music as developed by Hába or Schönberg. So it seemed inevitable to admit that the traditional tonal system had reached its limits, or was at least close to reaching its limits. So trying to deal with the situation, surprisingly, Hába on the one hand dedicated a lot of his time to develop new systems. On the other hand, basically sums up his own new theory of harmony as follows. It is clear from the previous statements, meaning the statements he did in his new theory of harmony, that the musical and theoretical design of the quarter-tone system is based on the same principles as the music of the half-tone system and the theory of this system. By equating the rules and mechanisms of the quarter-tone system with those of the half-tone system, Hába probably also wanted to show, presumably also with regards to critics, that the quarter-tone music was not something completely exotic, but that the connection between older and more recent music as quarter-tone music was completely unproblematic. So, for example, a quarter-tone scale could in the simplest way be used as a half-tone scale just transposed by a quarter-tone. Hába also applies the same principles of transposition by a quarter-tone to triads and other polyphonic sounds. A didactic approach is clearly noticeable. Again and again he addresses the reader directly with instructions such as: the practical task of the reader would now be that he acquires fluency in the transposition of all scales and all chords to the new pitches of the quarter-tone system. It would be best to do these exercises not only in writing but also on the quarter-tone piano. It would of course be easy to play quarter tones on the violin, for example, and we remember Hába was originally a violinist. The advantage of the piano, however, is a significant one. Not only melodies can be played on the piano, but also harmonies. For this very reason, both Hába and, for example, also Mellendorf spared little effort to develop microtonal pianos. Hába dealt extensively with instruments constructions in order to make microtones audible. Unlike us today, he could hardly fall back on many role models at the time. Taken from Suzette Mary Batten's dissertation on Hába's new theory of harmony, here is an illustration of this draft of the quarter-tone keyboard as actually implemented by the August Förster Company. The musical example Hába gives in his new theory of harmony are numerous. For example, he lists all intervals that arise in the quarter-tone system and their transpositions. He gives numerous examples of the 2, 3, and 4-tone chords and the scales that arise in the quarter-tone system. He also describes detailed the types of motion in voice leading, and he states that even in quarter-tone system there is no ruthless voice leading, and that the principle of tonality and polytonality in the quarter-tone system remain, as well as the principle of tonal centrality, but all in a broader sense. The necessity of a connection of the two systems, the old and the new one, to me remains sometimes a bit unclear, as he is also saying the rules for the progression of the individual tones of the initial sound to the subsequent sound are no longer subject to rules such as the 7th down, the 3rd up, but that the connection sound should now be freely invented. It is mainly about making the maximum of relationship possibilities understandable. Basically, we have now this material. It is now the task to create from this material chords of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, up to 24 tone chords, to practice position changes and inversions, and to create combinations based on the working methods described in the book. For example, by constructing a chord on C that consists of nothing but consecutive equal 3/4 tone steps, one would get a chord with a number of 8 notes, which is here in the third measure in the third system. This chord could be transposed 2 times, and thus all 24 notes are used. Hába is always looking for references to designations from tonal music. For example, he explains that exactly this chord can be divided into smaller harmonic groups, as for example into two diminished seventh chords. Hába considers that this chord and another 24-tone chord that is split by consecutive 5 quarter-tone steps would be very useful because interesting smaller harmonic groups could be derived from them. However, after considering the new chord possibilities, he notices that a tertian system, meaning chords split by consecutive major or minor thirds, would be of rather limited importance for the quarter-tone system. But in addition to the major and minor thirds, there is now also the neutral third and so-called mixed constructions, or mixed sounds combining all kinds of thirds could be formed. In general, chords that do not consist of consecutive intervals of the same degree are called mixed constructions. So he distinguishes between regular and irregular chordal constructions, but regular chordal constructions can also be changed into irregular chordal constructions by regrouping the tones. Through a schematic list of triads, Hába arrives at 253 triads, of which 55 triads belonged to the semitone system and thus 198 to the quarter-tone systems and were new. Each of the 253 triads can be varied by inverting a trice like any triad. Concerning the number of 4-tone chords, Hába comes up with 1,544 tone chords, and the number of 5-tone chords is even much larger, as concerning that each 4-tone chord can be combined with each remaining note of the quarter-tone scale. Hába also describes the basics of establishing new scales, which are formed by dividing the octave either asymmetrically or symmetrically, or based on tetrachords. So there is a large number of 5 to 23 step scales. Hába explains that the scales can be changed by switching on new tones and turning off the used tones, and thereby a large number of new scales can be gained. Here are 2 examples of scales he used in other compositions, like the first one he used in the Suite No. 3, Opus 16 for piano, and the second scale he used in his Fantasy No. 1, Opus 17, also for piano. I have now almost arrived at the end, or I have arrived at the end. I don't really want to talk about my own compositions, because for me at the moment dealing with microtones is more like getting to know the possibilities. I have recently written some works that make use of the 24-step equal division of the octave. One of these compositions we premiered this fall also here in Salzburg, so if by chance you are here, you could get an instant impression. The string quartet, for the draft of the string quartet that I wrote as a part of the artistic diploma thesis beginning of this year, I had an approach with a transposition, like I just tuned the instruments differently and let them play slightly delayed similar motifs. As Busoni already wrote, the field of microtones is infinite because nature created infinite gradation. I try to work out only some aspects that at a certain point in time I believe to be interesting or helpful. For example, simply gaining more tones or building new scales based on either systems. But now to me it would be not so much a question of having only more sound material, but to work with the quality of each sound, maybe even beyond certain systems. Thank you very much for listening.
Information and really brilliant analysis from his working with quarter tones. And perhaps I should add that Alois Hába had written a second book, Harmonielehre, which had been published first 15 years ago in German language with a translation by Mrs. Wislow-Gilova from Brno. And this book was published by usually Wislow-Gil and Professor Hesse, who had been working in Salzburg here in Mozarteum and Institute for Music Basic Research. And there's a deep connection between Salzburg and the work of Alois Hába, especially his third string quartet, Opus 12, had his first performance 100 years ago in Salzburg during the first festival of the International Society of Contemporary Music. So, thank you very much, and I think there will be questions in the audience.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, actually. I'm just wondering the folk music connection, because, I mean, so Hába, he told us about the arrangements of folk songs, and the string quartet or the XIV sounds nothing like folk music, and I don't think I've ever heard anything by Hába that sounds at all like folk music.
That he refers to folk music?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, are there any places where there's more of a direct connection with folk music? Like in Bartok, it's very clear that he's engaged, but...
I can show you, but I think... would you answer that?
As I know, he played, his family was making music, and he got to hear the music of the people of Moravia, the district where he grew up, and they didn't use the same tempered scales they played like as they listened to that. And so that was the reason for Hába was interested in other tone systems, but Möllendorf, you mentioned, was one of the first to practice this in Berlin, and Hába got in contact with this group, and so he was convinced that that would be the future of music. Later on he wrote in 6/1/6 tone, influenced by Busoni and Saint-Jean.
But he did it in his own way. He didn't make any attempt to sound like folk music, or even use modes that sort of relate to...
He used some melodies from folk music, but he tried to find out melodies without finishing. Melodies that will continue ever go on.
Like there is this arthematic music. But I think like the folk music was the first initial impression to think that the tuning is different.
That there must be another tune.
And I think he also writes in the book that you mentioned in the first chapters how he got to it, that since he and his brother had perfect pitch, they wanted to annoy his father while playing the violin and a bit out of tune, and so
Hába.
Exactly, he mentions very often his perfect pitch.
But it was a way of his time to find other scales and other pitches to work with. Yes.
It sounds like sort of second Viennese school, but just with water tones.
I mean, he was also like under the influence of like Schoenberg and
May I have a question? Did you kind of implemented his thinkings, or how to approach microtones into your own work? Or
yeah, actually I tried like in the string quartet, but like the use of different scales or generating new scales and transposing a scale just quarter tone. But I'm not sure like if that's now for me at the moment the best approach to working with microtones. But I think Hába to me is very interesting because he is so detailed about everything. Like he is, I don't know, like concerned about one theme for such a long time, and but...
And in his second book it's more detailed.
Okay.
It's very interesting to read it.
Yeah.
It has been forbidden, and...
Could you please write down the name of the book? Just that I think many of us would be interested in reading it.
It has the same title as the first book.
No, we didn't.
think it's Harmonielehre, the first in 1927 it was Harmonielehre.
It has a quite long title actually.
Of quarter, I write it so, 1/6, 1/5, and I think others there too. Systems.
So neue Harmonielehre.
Neue Harmonielehre. Good. Neue. And two neue. Neue Harmonielehre. And this work, how did I get it? It was Professor Hesse. Ulf-Diether Hesse. Was a publisher. I think you will find it in internet. Ulf-Diether Hesse, Hába Neue Harmonielehre. There are two big books, one with theory and one with the practice, with score examples.
Thank you.
So, are there other questions, please? No, so we will know all about Hába, and thank you very much. It was very explaining of Arabic music. Arabic music could get to know in 1 minute. It was really marvelous. Great work.
Maybe I comment. Some years ago discovered this website, macamworld.com.
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't really dive in, but if I want to know about that, then I look there.
Yeah,
It seems it looks for me as a non-specialist. It looks like it's professionally done and good readable notation and a couple of music as examples. So.
Yeah. So I started to work with Arabic music also not so long time ago, but really the theory books, they are sometimes quite confusing because they all write it somehow different. Also on the page there are some examples which I didn't find elsewhere. And so like, I don't know, like as I said, like when I found this course and it's a Kanun player myself and she really does it from practice and with ear training and that really helped me like getting it into practice.
2 years ago, then a new book has been published, Inside Arabic Music. That's a really good book for theory. I don't know who has written two young Arabic musicians inside Arabic music. You will find it in internet, even with examples to hear, to listen to, and to learn. The Jinn of Makam. That's one of the best books I ever saw. Inside Arabic music. Wer ist das?
Wer ist der Autor?
Das sind zwei. Two authors, but I don't remember the name, but you will find it under the title.
Johnny Farage and Sami Abush.
He has it already. Farage.
Johnny Farage and Sami Abush.
That's it.
So I cannot say which one is the best.
I have this book and I like it very much.
I suppose the issue is that the makam is not only a scale like in the technical way, in the Western way of singing. It's connected with the music itself. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, were there more questions?
So, thank you very much. Now we welcome Ulf-Diether Soyka, which will present his lecture of queer music. Ulf-Diether Soyka was born in 1954 in Vienna, and since 1985 he was the first is a participant of the Mikrotöne Symposium. He took part in the first, and since that time, I think they had every symposium since then. Yes, he's a composer and composed sacred music and a lot of different music. 2007, he has brought Mikrotöne's music to publication. For example, his melodic opera Ninja, performed in concert in Birmingham in 2012, and the multilingual opera Laila in the completely Mikrotöne in Künstlerhaus in Wien. The Second Symphony, performed in Vienna 2014, and the Third Symphony, the unplayable as it's called, it was digitally recorded. After studies with Friedrich Cerha and Ottmar Sweetner, Soyka worked as a conductor of numerous first performances. Yesterday. It belongs to the collection. For example, he took care of the composers that had been expelled from Austria when the Nazis came out with them in 1938. And as a composition teacher, he worked at grammar schools as an assistant at the Music University in Vienna, and as a teacher in the conservatory in Vienna, and as guest lecturer in Germany, England, and Australia. His micro-etudes for our students have been published in the UE Universal Edition Vienna.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for this wonderful symposium, and thank you for the notebook. Yes, this is a cultural question, maybe international or an intercultural question. Is there queer pitch, and if so, what is it meaning? The word queer was translated into German in Duden Dictionary in 2002 with the word komisch, funny, and seltsam, strange. Today the digital translator DeepL only contains the Germanized word queer. Queer is queer. The definition of which can be read in German at Wikipedia. The Duden also points out the similarity to the German word quer, whose synonyms schräg and schief are retranslated there as oblique, slanting, sloping, diagonal, as well as false, wrong, warped, distorted, aslant. I prefer the translation schräg from the gender seminar of the Music University of Vienna. This translation was traditionally used this way. To have queer ideas heißt schräge Ideen haben. The word pitch is translated into German as Tonlage, Tonstufe, Tonhöhe, which are all retranslated with the word pitch. So queer pitch means schräge Tonhöhe, queer in relation to other non-queer pitches. And the question arises whether, in the case of small comma differences, the same pitch is actually sounded twice or two different pitches. Queer pitch is a traditionally existing phenomenon. Schräge Tonhöhen in German are pitches that deviate ecmelically, e.g. at quarter tones, microtonal, e.g. syntonic chromata, 12th tone interval, etc., or microchromatically from the normative standard of the 12th tone tempered pitch stock and from the just intonation of the two tone genders, German Tongeschlechter, major and minor. These got associative connotations with gender and sex, since the division into hard, durus, and soft, molle triads in Italian music theory got normative for classical music. In performances, queer pitch always occurred and were often perceived as aesthetically special. But usually there was little music theoretical reflection why one and the same pitch was sometimes assessed as pure and sometimes impure. In 2015, the well-known tragical film about the impure singing soprano Marguerite Dumont, German title Madame Marguerite, thus got the subtitle Die Kunst der schiefen Töne, maybe translation The Art of Right Tones. Not every queer pitch was experienced as wrong, and queer became a trademark after a long period of discrimination. Countless recordings of popular and world music, unmistakable, reveal a contemporary deficit of music theory. For historical reasons, it has been unable to reflect on the real tonal relationship between queer pitches, since the last attempt to identify melodic and microintervallic intermediate tones with a globally understandable notation method failed at the World Music Congress in Cairo in 1932. Queer pitch can work not only subversive, exotic, avant-garde, or deviating from classical and academical pitch systems. It, however, can also fit well with traditional 12-tempered pitches or chords of the piano etude. This is evident in blue notes in jazz and in my alien micro etudes too, in which queer pitches are specifically prescribed for the solo instrument to match well the traditional pitches of the piano. In these interculturally inspired compositions, queer pitch is a fundamental component of the tonal set. You can hear thousands of queer aviating frequencies at the recordings of Arnold Schönberg's and Alban Berg's dodecaphony, although the microintervals were just not notated there, and the ecmetic quarter tones were excluded by the 12-tone norm, just as they were in classical music. According to Rudolf Haase, pitches that deviate from any just or tempered chromatic frequency can be right heard, zurechtgehört, if they are not more than 40 cent away upwards or downwards. Then they can be assigned to be intended pitch by the human auditory perception. This means that between chromatic semitones there is a range of 20 cent that could not be used for either classical or 12-tone music, the excluded quarter tones, natural thirds, etc. They were then called ecmetic pitches. And even within the right heard dodecaphonic half-tone range, sixth tones, etc. deviate, according to Doris Geller's textbook, from music theoretically predefined pitches in concerts. Higher leading tones we have heard now, and e.g., which can also be used as microintervals. Now I come to the question, queer pitch at the beginning of Beatles' song Yesterday. Pardon, how do I find it?
Escape? ESC.
Taste.
Oben links.
Oh, there is it. So now,
Und dann
Titel 1.
No?
No? No.
Ich mache mal Command und Tabulator dann
Bitte.
Wo kann man so?
Bitte nachher, ja. First example, Yesterday of Beatles, the first 3 tones.
Yesterday.
Should I bring it once more?
Yeah.
Yesterday.
back here. How to get it big? I don't understand.
Vorführen, oben das Menü. Auf Vorführen klicken, ganz oben.
Vorführen. Okay.
Da klicken und dann Präsentation vorführen, ersten Punkt anwählen.
Vollbildmodus?
Nein, oben den ganz ersten. Genau, hier. Klick. Ja, da sind wir.
Yeah. I used this notation, and here you see the whole tone from G to F, and later we will see what the Beatles are using for intervals. From my point of view as a non-queer music theorist, it was helpful for me that I got to know the beginning of Yesterday very late as a student with avant-garde microtonal trained ears. I discovered subtle pitch differences there that would otherwise have remained unconscious. The exact size of the intervals at the beginning of the song can be determined by resonance comparison using the microintervallic ecumenic 72-step duplex, another description of the notation. Duplex keyboard by Aaron Andrew Hunt, tonal plexus. This shows that the originally recorded beginning of Yesterday is not characterized by the whole tone step down from G to F, as in the later verses of the song, but the microintervallic tone sequence from YF to F. This is my names of the pitch. Here you say YG. The exact size of the intervals. Here, yes. This is the instrument. Here I have the black keys of the piano and the white keys and little keys on it. The first cover versions of the song, however, then presented the starting leitmotif Yesterday with other interval sizes. Only one of the first 5 cover versions also featured the original microinterval. The following table shows the cover versions that can still be found for free on the internet. And in 1965 you see 20% with the 12th tone interval step. Later 40% and 6% and 13% and then no one and then no one. And 1969-70 the Beatles split up. The first printed version was published in 1968 with the whole tone start G to F step down. And since 69 we have no one cover version with the microinterval, only with the whole tone or similar half tone sometimes. Here we have the first publication with the whole tone step. The 12th tone version of the beginning had almost no normative effect. In the cover versions, a starting whole tone step down dominated, whereas in the original Beatles version, this whole tone step only appears in the middle of the song, during the text repetitions. Songs beginning with the original microtones disappeared. Before drawing conclusions, it is important to bear in mind that the first printed version of the song was published in 1968 with a whole tone start. The first official printing of the song does not match the song original on the first 3 pitches. It was simply notated incorrectly. From 1982, then earliest, we can find note writing programs that could transfer the Beatles' original sound recording exactly into musical notations without regards of human wishes. But since their computer programming was based on traditional notation, the microintervals, which cannot be written in classical notation, are of course not found in the MIDI score. Instead, the initial small 12th tone interval was transcribed by the note writing program as equal high pitches, the first three notes, a prime interval. The computer notations is correct, related to the contemporary music theory of this time. The songbook published as not correct start version. So we have next question. Two halves of a vibrating string produce the same pitch. And if the string, maybe on the ancient monochord or canon or kanun, is split exactly in the middle. So in the history of music, it should not have been a problem to produce identical pitches or to recognize differences. Traditional European music intervals were then also produced by a corresponding proportional harmonic division of strings in numerical ratios on the polychord. The word canonic got a double meaning. It described the control of human behavior in music and a regional canon of social rules. The canonic scales were further developed into analogous mathematical philosophical models of thought. Arithmetic tables, lambdoma, world harmony according to Kepler, key symbolism, etc. Already in the older Indian cultural history, social rules were derived from what was heard, not yet was written down. This was the norm. The word shruti referred on the one hand to the smallest perceptible pitch difference and on the other hand to social norms. Also the biblical statement in the beginning was the logos was translated on the one hand religiously with words, on the other hand music theoretically with interval, pitches with mathematical wavelength number ratios. In the late antique tonal ethos symbolism, frequency oscillations were identified as triggers or determinable emotions and audience effects. Baroque musical rhetoric, classical scale symbolism and modern film leitmotif techniques built on this. But was the verbal transcription correct? Was the starting microinterval of the Beatles coincidence or intention? After the classical corrected cover versions appeared, the Beatles sang the song later again themselves in concerts on tours, with the original microinterval at the beginning also. They had sufficient ear training to distinguish and vocally reproduce the 12th tone at the beginning of the song. This is proven by the recording from Munich, where the tone step is slightly larger, more like 8th tone, but again a microinterval, much smaller than the half-tone step. Theoretically, this recording could have been unintentional, since according to contemporary press reports, this concert tour was not sufficiently rehearsed by the band. But then the recording of the perfectly rehearsed Japan tour followed, and with this, the beginning step again was sung quite exactly by the Beatles, a 12th tone step. So the microinterval, after more classic cover versions, was intended by the Beatles. Bitte nochmal um Gehilfe, wie ich das finde. Escape.
Escape.
Und
jetzt Command und Tabulator.
Yeah. This is the concept.
Yes,
once more.
Yeah.
We heard no. It's no half tone, it's no whole tone, it's a micro interval.
Very small.
Hard to hear. Hard to hear.
Hard to hear, maybe, but I speak about this problem later. A basic problem of music theory, however, is that musical events normally are verbalized through extra musical synesthesia and analogies. We say high and low tones, but they cannot fall down. We say acoustic color, etc. From this followed also the gendering of the chords, with major third hard masculine and with minor third feminine soft. The sloppy mistranscription of queer pitches corresponded with traditional cultural norms, and these had consequences for educational canon, for musical life, for instrument making, for industrialization, for legal development, copyright, and so on, for gender relations and ethno-musical research. Jetzt komme ich hier wieder nicht zurück.
Einmal auf die klicken, ja. Jetzt auf Vorführen.
Vorführen.
Und erstes.
Danke. Yeah, this was Shritri and the gender questions. In cover versions of yesterday that were recorded with female voices, there was a quasi-heterosexual standardization of the lyrics. The women do not sing why she had to go, but why he had to go. The boy band sang the micro-interval start, and the more sensitive, we called it more sensitive intermediate tones, even although accurately distinguishing between microintervals is acoustically easier at higher frequencies than in the pitch of a male voice. But only in one single female cover version is the microinterval at the beginning also clearly audible later. The explanation will not be so simple. Many concert recordings, around 70 cover versions, have disappeared from the market in the meantime. They could not be analyzed here. Where there are perhaps many more female microtonal versions, are mainly female queer micro-interval versions not longer findable, or were they held back, cancelled by the recording studios themselves. Was the beginning of the song rather an early rap, maybe? Were the Beatles concerned with a representation of non-identity of the identical unequal high prim notes in the context of remembering? Can the sequence of notes and memory have any normative effect at all if it is written down differently than it is sung? Are there all classical transcriptions only subversions of the really sounding music? Music ethnology, industrial progress, and intercultural context. For decades, Eurocentric ethnomusicology tried to contribute to international understanding by researching musical traditions from all over the world and collecting their recordings. How failed these attempts and contributed to discord? One of the leading ethnomusicologists, for example, Marius Schneider, compared cross-cultural tonal systems he found after the Second World War and concluded that all the world's musical cultures would be based on a common sonance order. His idea was interesting, but his system was wrong, because he had reinterpreted unequal intervals e.g. neutral thirds or Arabic quartertones, as equal in size, by transcribing them in the European classical 12-tone notation. So his simplified frequency harmonization could not be the basis of epistemology, world hearing instead of world view. Professor Hase tried this. Because so all musical systems, consonance, dissonance, melody, etc., were wrongly derived from the supposed only natural tone series of string and wind instruments, where only frequency ratios, multiples and fractions from the prime numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, were included in the theory, while other pitches were considered impure or primitive. The more complex natural tone series of the bells, tubes, plates, drums, gongs, etc., which had already been mathematically calculated by Alfred Kalene in 1910, remained excluded again, although Béla Bartók had written a microtonal version of his violin sonata. It was only decades later that William Setares was able to prove with exact digital frequency analysis how Slendro, Gamelin, etc. really fit to frequency spectra of the other natural overtone series of musical instruments used there, gongs, bells, etc. But meanwhile, Western music had become industrialized and commercially enforced worldwide. Its digital recordings shaped the legal systems, copyright, commercial and digital law, displaced and expropriated other musical cultures. Rudolf Hase, worldwide basic harmonic research, attempted to provide physical evidence that the shape proportions of the female head would correspond with minor chord frequency ratios and those of the male head with major. For that, he assigned that exactly measured length relations to a normative pitch grid of 12 given frequency relations and excluded quarter-tone relations. I question the conclusions because their results are self-referential from the 12-tone default. A 72-step clear pitch grid would have allowed him greater variety and accuracy. New challenges in the context of clear pitch. Even a system of 72 pitches per octave has certain peculiarities. Where microchromatic quartertones become the melodic norm, they can no longer be called ecmetic. Just a much purer classical and polymicrotonal chords can be intoned in the multi-step pitch stock than in traditional system. More and closer neighboring microintervals can also have a confusable or condissonant superimposed effect here. When sounded simultaneously, they can trigger much more oblique beats and interact extremely dissonantly. An othering process used, for example, for leitmotifs in horror films. The Beatles' melodic microinterval, on the other hand, sounded as a melodic sequence, one note after the other. It was soon over, maybe according to the song lyric, why she had to go. Now we have micro melodies as well as micro diatonic and chord modulations, etc. My lecture also has deficits. Only the first melodic step yesterday was examined. The main frequency was identified as static without noting transients and glissandi without. The microintervallic downward steps of the Beatles versions was registered, but not its relation to the accompanying chord. In the original, the first note at the syllable yes is 1/24 note higher than the guitar, and the longer third note with day is 1/24 note lower than the guitar, from which the 12th tone step in the melody adds up. At the concert in Japan, on the other hand, the third note day was the same pitch as the guitar, and the first yes note was minimally higher than the original recording, because the 12th tone step down was really sung in Japan too. And that the 24th note differences cannot be represented with the 72 note step notation used here. Even any more exact clear pitch notation is still incomplete, even with differentiation in 144 microtones per octave goes to the current successive pitch discrimination threshold of the well-trained human ear. Summary and suggestion. Does queer pitch exist? Yes and no. Calling something queer presupposes a comparison with a non-queer situation or norm. Where queer itself becomes the norm, it is no longer called queer. Notated, prescribed pitch deviations are often performed unexactly, even more queer, in sounding practice for lack of ecmetic microtonal ear training. I suppose that analogies between the world's different tonal systems, wavelengths and frequency ratios, e.g., really exist in the background and would be recognizable as soon as we improve Europeans' ear training and notation. Crucial is whether we can distinguish within the pitch stock 12 tones per octave, 5 or 7, 31, 48, 53, 72 or 144, equal temperament, or commas in just intonation. So I propose to develop an e-book reader that displays scores similar to Google Maps, etc., with a flexible, variably adjustable accuracy scale and with purposefully changeable pitch symbols. This could be calculated by artificial intelligence based on Human code, music XML, news data or similar data processing and software. In the case of traditional one-to-one score scaling, the classical representation of pitch notation could be visible on the book reader, and if a more accurate scale is set, the more detailed microinterval accidentals, commas, shruti, quartertones, etc. could then also become visible, and by recording in rehearsal could give feedback. Such a digital flexibilization of musical notation can contribute to more finely scaled pitch control, absolute and relative hearing, gamified ear training, microtonal ecmetic music praxis, clarification of intercultural relations, copyrights, and to an adequate contemporary music theory of world music. But it also leads to more industrialization of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulf-Diether. As now we have a new word, queer, for our music, and I think we will use it. And thank you. And if there are questions, please, we take about 2 minutes for that, and we have a coffee break after that. So we have time.
I just want to ask, because I just don't know where I can learn more about this genre of sound, because I have no
maybe you could find at Vienna Music University. If you start studying music theory there, you have to absolve 2 seminars of gender theory.
And then there, I could get more information on the background of this.
The professor does not know very much about music theory, but the students know.
But so where does this come, the perception and the illusion of gender in the sound?
Yeah, it's not. I think we have some books. Feminine Endings is a well-known book. You can find it.
Feminine Endings.
It is already strange that it speaks of feminine minor intervals. Why intervals are not feminine or female or male?
I have it not here, but you find it with Google.
Okay. Other questions? I think we'll have to discuss a lot about this.
I would like, if anybody produces such a Google system for notation.
So, and we have now a break, 20 minutes, and then we'll continue a coffee break. We are in time. Very well. Thank you for listening. Thank you.